Welcome back to Tanya in 5. Today, we recap letter 16 of book 4 in Tanya, Iggeret HaKodesh. This is one of the more sublime letters in Tanya, in which the Alter Rebbe gives us an overview of the Divine Sefirot, or the divine attributes, the divine systems of operation, as they are compared to the human experience and how we operate internally, how our soul operates, how we think, and how we feel. This video is going to be a brief overview of that, but if you're looking for more details about the 10 Sefirot, the divine system of operation, and the worlds, then I'm going to put a link in the description to a playlist in which I explore this in more detail. But here's the overview. But first, the Alter Rebbe gives us 2 introductions. Number 1, the idea that we use the human experience as a way of understanding the divine system comes from the verse which reads, "Umipsari echze eleka," from my flesh I shall see God. That is, from my own human experience, I can get an idea of how God operates. And the reason for this is, explains the Alter Rebbe, because our internal system of how we feel things and how we experience, how we relate to others, is really derived and a diminutive of the divine system. And because God invested of himself within our soul, therefore we also contain within us, in a very small, minute measure, the entirety of the divine system, and thus, through analyzing our own internal system, we understand the divine. Number 2, even though it's true we are using the human experience as an analogy to understand the divine system, we must remember that there's an infinite gap between human and divine, between creator and created. We are finite, God is infinite, and thus there really isn't any comparison. The Alter Rebbe describes it as trying to think of a beautiful tree as compared to the ashes that are left after you burn that tree down. It's true, the ashes are derived from the tree, but there really isn't any comparison between the two. But nonetheless, because our internal system of our soul is derived from the divine system, we can still use our system to understand, at least in some small measure, the way the divine system works. So here goes. We start with the emotional system. And this has 3 general attitudes. One is chesed, give unconditionally. Doesn't matter who's asking, whether they deserve, don't deserve, who they are, what they are. Just give. Gevura, restraint, says we only give if the recipient is worthy. If he doesn't deserve, he doesn't get. Then there is the middle blend, which is compassion. I understand that this person may not deserve, but I'm going to give anyway because I feel compassion. Even if they don't need, I feel compassion, I'm going to give. Now, these 3 are all the way I feel about it. Then the next stage is I have to come up with ways of getting it done. Giving to this person after I have the desire to actually give in whichever one of these 3 ways, either chesed, gevura, or tiferet, kindness, giving unconditionally, gevura, giving with discipline, or tiferet, giving compassionately, whichever one of those 3 it is, I have to now figure out a way to actually get it done. I have to overcome internal reasons that say not to give. I have to get over my own shyness. I have to get over others who may say don't do it. To push myself to actually get it done. The Alter Rebbe tells us to think of the following analogy. A father who feels like he wants to give some wisdom, impart some wisdom to his child, to his son. So there's the inherent feeling of giving, the chesed, or even if it's gevura, giving because his child deserves, or if it's compassion, giving to his child even though he doesn't deserve, but there's a feeling of giving. Then the father has to think of, how am I going to relate this message? I got to find the right words, maybe even find some sort of example or analogy that demonstrates the point. I have to come up with ways to implement the feeling that I have to give. I may even have to overcome some of my own internal issues that are holding me back from giving. Right? So I have the part of me that says to give, and then that's invested in the advice and internal mechanism by which to implement my desire to give. And behind all that, there's the love I bear to my child. I feel love toward my child, therefore I want to give, therefore I'm going to figure out how to give. And all of this will be conveyed through an intense desire I have to actually give, a connection, a bond that I feel with my child. That's how it's actually all going to be given. If I give it to my child without any of that feeling or bond, or if my child just overhears me speaking about it, it's not going to have the same impact as if I were to give it with all the feelings and intensity of connectivity to my child. So the love for my child, the desire to give to my child, the figuring out how I'm going to give to my child, and then finally this intense bond I feel for my child. All of that is conveyed to my child. Now that's in terms of the systems of feeling till it's finally implemented and finally delivered to the recipient. But all of that is created by my ideas. What do I value in life? Someone who values foolish things, when they deliver to someone they want to give to, they'll deliver and convey foolish things. Someone who has a more heightened sense of reality, values more important things, then what they convey will be of value. So we have the values, the ideas the person has, that directs the love I feel for my child, to want to give to my child, to figure out how to give to my child, to the bonding with my child, till my child finally gets the ideas I want to share with him. Now all of that is in the human experience. When we talk about the godly soul, all of this holds the same true, the same system, but all directed toward God. There's the ideas about God. God's infinite. God's the source of all life. Everything is of no significance in the face of God. All various different ideas about God, and each idea about God can be considered, contemplated, and thought about to the point that it becomes real and I feel for it. Some ideas will generate an intense love for God. Some ideas will generate an intense fear of God. Some may make me be in awe of His grandeur and His beauty. Those are all different feelings of how I want to connect to God. Then I have to think about making sure I actually implement that connectivity. How am I going to make sure that I serve Him properly? Remove all the obstacles internally and externally to make sure I actually serve Him. Feel that intense bond and connection with God so that I can actually channel all of these feelings I have for God into actual action, implementation, that I speak of God, that I act for God, and so on. And this entire system we just described, all my feelings towards God, built on the ideas I have about God. Now all of this, the ideas that are invested in the feelings, which then go into considering how to implement, and then finally the connectivity of implementation, and so on and so forth, all of that is a model that gives us a small-scale version of what it's like in the divine system and how God gives us. Again, I'm going to put a link to a playlist in the description in which I go through this in much more detail, and you can get a much better insight into the various different nuances of all the things we talked about here. The takeaway from all of this is, when serving God, it's not one-dimensional. It's not just in action. It's not just in feeling. It's not just in ideas. It's in all of it. Our ideas about God, we must develop those. And then we must develop our feelings towards God. Every kind of feeling. Love, awe, respect, gratefulness. All of our different feelings, the entire system we have, our ideas, our feelings, every kind of feeling, our connectivity, all of that can and ought to be channeled in the service of God. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude letter 17.